Thank you. Thank you all for being here. It's always nice to read at this bookstore. I've been coming for a long time, and this may not seem like a lot of people to you, but when I began this tour, I was in New York, which went very well, and then I went to New Haven, and I arrived at my event, and there was no one there, not a single human being. So it's a pleasure to be here amongst several human beings. This is a slightly difficult book to read from because it moves through very different modes of storytelling, different points in time. The story is essentially that of a bipolar man who is in his mid-40s looking back at a time in his life when things changed dramatically for his family. I'm not going to introduce it too much, and I have come to be a little bit tired of reading about very sad people. So I'm going to read one of the few moments in this book where he's on a high. He cycles through moments of mania and depression. And there's plenty of mania, but this is perhaps a more cheerful moment. We are at the Owl. Tess out on the floor. Seymour running his door. And me, I'm working my bar. It's crowded with students. This, the night before spring break begins. An Emerson tradition, one last party before the party, before flying off to Mexico or Florida or Texas or wherever else they went each spring. Nights like this, I have a bar back. I can't quite see him now, but I know he's there, marrying bottles, bringing buckets of ice. He's a blur. Some local kid, a townie, who nearly by definition despises the students he's serving. He's someone talented, or he wouldn't be there. The job pays too well. We can afford to be selective. I can't see his face, but I have some vague sense that he had unruly hair. I may be confusing him with someone else from another time. So many bars in my life, but who gives a fuck, right? Let's just say he's a tall, thin kid with wild curls. Let's say his name is Matt or Craig, and that Seymour brought him in as a favor to the kid's father, who's a guard out at the Pine. So around 9, the place is humming, and all of us are on. It's that feeling when all the planets are aligned, a rare and lovely thing. I'm on the upswing, then and now. There is no grime obscuring my eyes. I'm calm and fast. The orders come in over the bar, and from the waitresses, Tess among them. I see all the drinks before they're made. There is no math too complicated. The world a perfectly ordered place. All systems pure. Let's say dead center you've got 2 long-haired idiots who think they're both Eddie Vedder. One of them keeps raising his hand saying, yo bro, yo bro, yo. And then you've got 3 guys you like on one end who tip well, and some girls whose order you already know on the other, and Tess is coming in at the service side, and she's waiting for 2 vodka tonics, 1 Jack and Coke, and 3 Cuervo shots. The guys you like are Coronas with Cuervo shots back, and it's all coming in at once. Nights like this, your filters are flawless. Nights like this, you're some kind of prodigious performer, some magical dancer. You see each glass before it's even on the runner, and then there they are, all in a line, and you can't even remember doing it. Setting them up, 6 shot, 3 rocks, ice, 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 lime, lime, straw, straw. The right hand is moving the vodka bottle on the 2 count from glass to glass to glass. You start the jack pour with the other in time with the second vodka. Vodka back to the well, jack to the first shelf behind you. Always return bottles to their place. There must never be disorder. Your thumb on the gun goes tonic, tonic, Coke. You sail that Cuervo bottle over the shot glasses and split 3 from the 6. Tess gets her drink first. Always. She looks at me with an expression I can't parse. It is not part of our repertoire, our silent language of the workplace. There's the smallest pause, the briefest slowing, and then she pivots and glides away. Now the rubber runner is free for 2 martini glasses. Fill them with water and ice because you have style despite the place. You pop 3 Coronas, the opener as easy in your hand as brass knuckles. You deliver it all and follow with a plate of limes and salt. You smile at the guys. You remember their names. You say something funny about Florida. They say, "Keep the change, Joey." You mix the Cosmos in a shaker. You think kamikaze plus cranberry. You think very tricky landing. Vodka, triple sec, lime. Very tricky landing. Because 1,000 years ago, that's how you learned it. And every single time the order comes, for an instant, in a flash of film, you see one of those planes, one of those zeros in black and white, tearing out of the sky. Then the vodka is a 2-count 3 times in one hand, so 6, and the triple sec in the other. Then there's the roses, then there's the cranberry. You dump the chilling glasses, you cap the shaker and go one hard snap. More than that is meaningless theater, and you don't need that bullshit. Now look at the girls. Look right at them and smile to say, these are yours. To say, even if I'll never fuck you, we can pretend. Because when you're like this, when you're fearless and deadly, when you have the fleeting maniac confidence, the electric rise that brought you to Tess in the very first place, then you know there isn't a woman alive who wouldn't take you to bed. And as if to prove your point, as if to prove your own invincible brilliance, you fly the shaker across each glass, and there's just enough down to a single violet drop. There's just enough to fill those 3 full to their brims. They say, "Thanks, Joey," and they smile up at you because you are elevated, because you are impervious even to gravity. And they say in their secondary language, "We would do anything for you, Joey March, anything at all." This is what it feels like out there at the Owl on a Friday night in April, with the love of your life speaking strange with her eyes, when all the world is a land of perfect logic, when there is no downturn, and Seymour Strout smiles at you from the door, gives you a certain nod that says he knows too that this night is a good one. That there is a secret rhythm, a secret chord, and all of us are inside of it. All of us are infected, and this good night goes on, and this crowd is another single thing which swells and deflates. Tess returns amidst some lull or another. She glides in on one of those shifts in pressure, a disturbance in the atmosphere, and she arrives with the same look, speaking that same silent phrase I can't yet decode. I go to her and incline my head. She brings her mouth to my ear. It is a sublime and extraordinary privacy. We drop below the waterline. Down here, the noise is muted. The crowd retreats. She says, "The bathroom," and I follow. This is an order I've never been given. Not here, not by Tess. I abandon my post. I give the bar to the back. There's a narrow bathroom out by the storeroom, facilities for the labor. When I open the door, she's standing, leaning against the small sink, her shoulder blades to the mirror. "Close it," she says, giving a sharp little nod. I fall back. There's a quiet click sealing us in, and the bar noise loses its treble. Here, her expression is familiar. Lust. Though there is something else to it I still can't translate. Maybe it is the degree. "Hey, Tess," just to say her name. The clock has started. The ice is melting. A towel is folded over the sink divider. A cap is loose on a bottle of olives. We're low on cherries. The bar is a savage animal I've left untended. Tess is looking at me in her new way, or the old way multiplied and laced with some new thing. "Joey," she says. There's a single dim bulb hanging from the ceiling. There's no tenderness in her face. What I love is when she narrows her eyes and tilts her head just an inch to the left and smiles at me with her lips closed, an uncanny expression which contains both desire and sympathy. This is not that. This contains a foreign and faraway thing, a flake of malice. She draws her hands up the outsides of her thighs beneath her black skirt and bends at the waist. Her face is replaced by my own. For a moment, I look at my eyes in the mirror, then down to the curve of Tess's back. She's upright again. She winds her panties around her right fist like she's taping for a fight. She reaches again and pulls her skirt up, not slowly. She widens her stance. "Come here," she says. There is no sing-song in her voice, no girlish theater. "Come here." I take the space between us, a single step. I'm looking down at her. If I were to look up, I'd see myself. I can sense that dark figure. She moves her fingers around the back of my head and squeezes. She looks right into my eyes. So I think I'm going to stop there. I see my very first babysitter in the audience. So I've yet, not that this would shock her, I have not yet found the courage to finish that scene aloud. Joey fell in love very early and wildly in love with a very independent woman who has really no... she's selfish the way men are often selfish. She is a wanderer. She disappears, she returns, she disappears, she returns. And Joey takes on many of the characteristics that we often ascribe to men, particularly in film and fiction. So Joey is, in a sense, the princess in the tower, and Tess is a sort of errant knight. And this scene that he's recalling it takes place when they're in their 20s. The next bit I'll read is when he's quite a bit older, and he's looking back at this relationship from a point that perhaps has less heat to it. I'm afraid that I have made some fundamental error. I worry that I did not look at Tess correctly, have not. Through all the years together, and then from here too, from afar, in all these increments of recollection. What is the nature of this error? I'm not certain. Is it something to do with the way that I observed her? Something to do with beauty? With the effect her body had on me? To do even with the words themselves? Beautiful, for one. Think of the way I saw her in the bathroom that sad afternoon. The light on her breasts, the slope of her back, her thighs, her calves, her narrow ankles, all the rest I've described to you. The power she had. Not she, but her body. You see in those descriptions that there are no scars, no blemishes, no hairs trapped beneath her skin. All that body and so little mind. But that's not true either. More than anything, she exists in me as a force, a heat deep in my spine, a turning in my chest. It is not her physical shape that stirs me most or first, and it never was, not even from the start. It is everything else: will, fire, fury, lust, intelligence, vision, heart, humor, conviction. I am doomed to this litany, to confusion, to cliches, to dead words. And yet, and still, the way she appears here to me now so clearly, I see no imperfection. And is that not a kind of tyranny? Haven't I imprisoned her, us? She becomes material so easily, whole and in parts, her skin, her eyes, her shoulders, her mouth. I do not mean to do it, but there she is, assembling and disassembling. Here I close my eyes. The falling line of her throat, her feet, which she did not like for their size and flatness. Too big, she said, so ugly. But no, there was nothing ugly. And I do remember scars. One thin curve soaring from her hip bone, left. A lopsided diamond at her ankle, left. The start of a spiral on the meat of her shoulder, right. coming home from somewhere in winter, her eyes red from the cold, nose running, hair a tangle, lips dry and flaking, or the relentless pimples which appeared on her chin late into her 30s, the lines at her eyes and across her forehead, the flecks of gray in her hair. It was all the same. Her beauty deepened. I cannot change this, and I cannot avoid the word. For so long I have tried to make her ugly in body and mind, but there is nothing to be done. Through all the years we are expected to stop looking at one another. I looked. When abruptly we were no longer young, through the panic of age and accelerating time and deteriorating bodies, through the shock of, the rebellion against, and at last the resignation to those things, I watched her. I could not stop, and I wonder if there was an error there, a failing somehow. I wonder if through all that watching I was doing her harm. If to see her always bathed in these golden lights was itself an act of violence. Was it the violence of worship? Have I, all these years, made her something impossible, inhuman? But then I remember my frustration, how often I hated her, how often we fought, her stubbornness, her selfishness, her disappearances, physical and otherwise, her cruelty and blindness. I have not forgotten how anger flowed between us for so many years. That's all there too. And because it is, I believe I have loved her in spite of those things. I believe I have loved her fairly. So I think I'll stop there and we'll have a conversation. Okay, sure.
Thank you.
I should just say before we start that Marisa Silver is the author of many books, including Little Nothing, which was recently published. I spent most of the day reading it. It's really beautiful, mesmerizing.
6 of her books. I've got your titles, Marisa, right?
So I highly recommend you buy her books as well.
And I want to say that I sort of shoved my way into this evening.
That's true.
Because Alexander and I have been sort of parallel playing book tour. We sort of seem to, or like hopscotching, showing up to the place where the other one was the night before. And I read his book while I was on tour, and I was so mesmerized by it in so many ways that I said to him, please let me interview you at Skylight. And so this was not an intent, he did not intend for this, but I said, rather than dominate the questioning from the audience, I'll dominate it from here. So anyway, I'm so happy to be here. This is an extraordinary book, and it's so complex, and there's so much to unpack. So I think the first thing that I do want to do is just have you maybe describe a little bit. I mean, the book starts with a murder, which you wouldn't know from the beautiful passages he just read. So maybe you could just give us a little sense of what the book is. And
I think maybe I have such a hard time coming up with an elevator pitch. I'll just read you the very first chapter. It's only a paragraph. In the summer of 1991, my mother beat a man to death with a 22-ounce Estwing framing hammer, and I fell in love with Tess Wolff. Now, many years later, they have both disappeared, and I am alone here on this pretty clearing in the woods, alone save for the tar and the bird and the other thing for which I have no name.
Okay.
So now you know what it's about.
So it's not just, it's about a lot of things. So, the first most obvious question, but I think it's one we all want to know, is what were the origins for you of this story?
I went to college in a small town in Washington State called Walla Walla, Washington, and at the time, it's now become a sort of hip wine town, but at the time it was an unhip prison town with a decent liberal arts college, and we used to go into the wheat fields and smoke pot and watch the sunset and play guitar or try to play the guitar, and there was always you could always see the prison lights reflecting, especially when there were clouds and fog. You could always see the sort of specter of the prison, and I was always conscious of it. They executed people while I was in college, and I was a pretty spoiled kid and was not taking advantage of the education I had been granted, but I was still aware that my neighbors, when I moved out of the dorms, my neighbors were the wives and children of prisoners, and I could never quite shake that knowledge, and it was a kind of haunting thing. And even many years after I graduated, I thought about that. And I originally set out to write a book about the sort of dichotomy there, the two separate worlds sort of pushed together. So there was that. And then there was this idea of writing characters that went against traditional gender roles, and I liked the idea of writing a man who was sort of stuck in a tower, waiting for his love to return to him, the way that so many novels deal with. Or not only novels, of course, films, television. We always see the mysterious man riding off into the sunset, coming back bloodied and full of stories, to the open arms of his patient lover. And I like the idea of sort of playing with those roles.
Yeah, I would. So the first thing let's talk about that, because there is this sort of fascinating gender reversal, both in the relationship between Joe and Tess, and also the relationship between Joe's father, Richard, and his mother, Anne Marie, who's the one who's committed the murder. And when Anne Marie commits this murder, Richard sort of devotes the rest of his life to. He moves to this town and becomes one of these people who has moved to the town in order to be with the person in jail. And what's so fascinating about that is the book really sort of opens out to be a rumination about loyalty and about what the value and the harm of being loyal is, because both Anne Marie does this. I mean, she kills somebody,
but she does it for a reason.
She does it for a reason because he's committing violence towards his wife.
Right.
But she also does it 7 times.
Right.
So that makes it impossible for us as the reader to sort of have a simple moral relationship to her, which is also, I think.
I don't know.
No, you think?
I've talked quite a bit about this, and the more I think about it, the more I think that indeed, I think you can see her as completely righteous. I mean, it was not a premeditated crime. She saw this horrible man beating his wife and children. She had worked for many years as an ER nurse in Seattle. She'd seen the results of this kind of abuse over and over and over again. She was privy to the system that essentially endorses it, or at least protects the perpetrators of those crimes. At a certain point, like the women in this college, you lose patience, and I think
7 times.
I don't defend necessarily vigilante justice, but there's something about what she does that is at least understandable, and
for sure.
I think
but there's also. Well, as I read it, there's an excess to her act that makes it sort of there's a question, and you bring that up in the book that she's given a life sentence mostly because of the number of times, not simply the. But I think that what I want to get at is more about this issue of loyalty. And what's so fascinating, and Alexander touched on it, is that we're used to reading narratives in which a woman is forever loyal to her man. And this is a narrative in which the 2 men are loyal to really quixotic, challenging women who are not particularly interested in softening themselves to meet a man's expectations of them. And I want you to talk a little bit about that, because it really, to me, brought up, well, what is the value of sort of undying loyalty, and what is the harm of that kind of love, both for the father and the son?
Yeah, I think the question in my mind was whether or not it was true loyalty, or it was a sort of pathological problem. And it's interesting because a lot of people, particularly women who've read this book, have surprised me by having little sympathy for these quixotic women you describe, and that surprised me. And I don't know why that is exactly. I see Tess, and I see Anne Marie, his mother, and the object of his affection. I see them both as deeply sympathetic characters, And I admire the way they live their lives. I mean, they're a little selfish, but I mean,
yeah.
Okay, they're more than a little. They're more than a little selfish, but there's something wild and wonderful about them.
I agree, but they really do. They're constructed in contrast to our expectation
Sure.
about how a woman, and both of them have a violence to them, which
Yep.
we don't associate with women as much. And they
Right.
both, there's Anne Marie kills this man, and then Tess, having moved to this town, becomes quite impassioned about Anne Marie, and she aligns herself with certain people from the university, certain women who are also very impassioned about this issue. And but there's a kind of violence and there is a kind of vigilantism about both
Sure,
women,
sure.
and it's fascinating that the two men are sort of carried along by it, and that their devotion to these women allows them to not question something that is in some ways, it's certainly not societally comfortable.
Right. That's true. That's true. I don't know. I'm not sure what was the.
There's no question.
Okay. I mean, the origin of that. I don't know. I guess I like women like that. I mean, not violent vigilantes, but I think I think of my mother to begin with. She's a strong, independent, fierce person. And when I was younger, she was fiercer. And I remember so clearly in this city, sitting next to her, driving somewhere, and some guy pulled up to us, and he said something, whatever he said, and my mom turned to him and just, I don't know what she said, but I remember it being utterly mesmerizing and shocking, and she was saying words that I had never heard. And the fact that I still remember that, I think, is sort of, I guess it's indicative of just how profound it was at that particular time. And I've always liked that in women. I like fierce women. I like tough women.
But I think this book is unusual in creating these really powerful, fierce, really unpredictable women. You don't see it a lot, and it's really refreshing.
Oh, well, that's
and it's wonderful. It's really great. There's a third woman in this book as well, a sister named Claire, and I'm really fascinated by this character because she really doesn't exist. She's not present in the book at all. The book is sort of written to her in part. When he read, he's speaking to a you, and Claire is a you. I mean, we are all the you, and Claire is the you.
Yeah.
But she's also a really strong female who makes a completely different kind of choice given the situation she's in. And I'm really fascinated by what your decision-making process was in terms of absenting her from the narrative.
Yeah, I like the idea of someone, particularly a woman, doing something that serves her, or at least it seems as if it serves. She goes to London, marries up, essentially. This is a working-class family. She meets somebody who is quite wealthy, and she just, when this crime is committed, she's done with the family. And she never comes home. And I know people who have done that, and I have friends whose brothers or sisters have just gone. Mm-hmm. And I think, some of us have done the same thing. We just say, we're done with our family. I have not done this, but, it's a thing that happens. And to demand an explanation, I think we demand explanations from characters in film and in fiction all the time, and I think it makes for terrible art. And I like the idea of a story where people do things that serve them, and that's it. That's the reason. It's not because they were abused as a child. It's not because they had a terrible relationship with their fathers. It's just because this is what happens in a life.
Which I think is also another thing that's really wonderful about this book is there isn't a lot of we don't really, aside from the we don't know Anne Marie's psychological backstory. So she performs this crime or whatever, commits this crime, but the book resists saying, why is she like this? Where does this violence come from? In the same way that it resists sort of psychoanalyzing Claire. And I think that's something really makes the book feel like a lived book instead of an explained book or a pandering book, because that's life.
But I think that's the reader's responsibility.
Yeah.
I mean, I certainly there are answers to those questions, but I think they should be provided by the reader.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, when I'm reading, that's what I like. That's what I like in a book. I like to be challenged to make some decisions about these characters without being provided an answer at the end.
Yeah. I mean, but it also creates a sort of. It's a wonderful way of provoking a reader into a book, because you're not spoon-fed the information that you want, and so you read more deeply and more deeply. I want to go back to a little bit about when you were reading. You read a passage that is, as you said, Joe in his sort of more manic stage, and I think you all heard in the language is, Alexander's a really, I'd say, musical writer and a very poetic writer, and the language of the mania is very different in the book from the language when he's in his very low moments, and it's sort of a wonderful way to enter into the experience of being a manic depressive. And how did you come to that? Was it something that you knew early on you would do, or did you sort of find it?
I can't say that from the very beginning I knew, but very early on I thought it's a great way to keep yourself interested as a writer, because essentially I have one narrator, but that narrator shifts so constantly that it began to feel like two separate narrators, and that was a relief for me, because when I was sick of him in one mode, I could go to another mode.
Right.
And so there's that, and there's also I thought of it from the very beginning as a kind of piece of music which would rise and fall in line with his emotional experience, and I also thought of him. He's both. His memory is both active and passive, and there are these two separate modes of recollection. One, the memory. He's going in search of memory, and in the other, memory just comes to him the way it does. If we smell a perfume or food or whatever it is that provokes in us some recollection. But he is that happens to him, sure. But he also is actively seeking memory, as if in doing so he will be able to make order of his life. And somehow I associated that act with a kind of musical composition.
Are you musical?
No, I'm absolutely not musical. I like poetry, and I see music in poetry,
right.
But I'm not a very good poet.
Because I think all of your books have that same sort of musicality to it, and the rhythm of the language is really precise. And
that's intentional. It's important to me.
Yeah.
I read everything I write aloud, and it's very important to me for a book to sound. I want the sentences to have a rhythm. I like.
The other thing that's really prevalent in all your books, I think, is there's a way in which you return to certain images and return to certain sentences even, and over and over and over again. And it is that something you do consciously, or is it just sort of?
Yeah, I think in earlier work it was a bit of a tic. Mm-hmm. Again, it's one of those things where you substitute original thought or writing for repetition.
Clever thing.
Yeah. And if it was my mom, I think, actually, who reads everything I write, who pointed that out to me. Enough with the and. And she was completely right. But on the other hand, there is I do want a refrain or several refrains.
What works to me about it is that when you return to certain sentences, exact sentences or thoughts, it's the way we think. We sort of perseverate over the same things over and over and over again. So there's something, it really draws you into the interiority of a character, because it's something that, from the outside, a narrator would not do, because it would be repetitive. Right. But a person does. That's how the way that we think. We sort of circle back and back.
And it's a deeply interior book. I mean, he's not a guy on a bar stool telling you a tale. Right. He is I mean, at times he's telling you, the reader, at other times he's talking to himself. I mean, he is trying to stay sane, and I think he is using storytelling or something somewhere between recollection and storytelling as a kind of medicine, as a way to sort of to stave off loneliness. And for me, that was always the project. That the idea was that he would tell this story to himself. He would go back and recall these events as a way to keep himself accompanied.
You know, in the beginning of the book, you say, the mother says, nothing arrives out of thin air. There are precedents and there are signs, always indicators and histories. Only an idiot or a child could be surprised. And a lot of the book, to me, is about legacy. And it's about, and certainly for the main character, he's obsessed with trying to understand whether his manic depression exists in his mother.
Right.
And he sort of he sort of comes to different decisions about that. But I think the book is a lot about legacy of what's handed down from parent to child. It's about what's handed down institutionally, about violence towards women. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, that was also
yes.
that was certainly part of the plan from the beginning, and the whole notion of sort of the hereditary nature of mental illness and just how clearly those lines can be drawn. But again, I didn't want to provide an answer to that question, and I think it's because he never receives an answer. He wants to know just how alike he is with his mother, and she is impossible. Right. She is stubborn and remote and not very communicative, and so he's stuck with the question. And this book, at this point, must sound just utterly horrible. No. Anyway.
But what's so interesting to me is during the course of it, he doesn't seem to ally himself with his father very much, except over the course of the novel he begins to identify, I think, a little bit more in the way that he sees his father's deep loyalty to his mother, and I think he sort of associates his own loyalty to Tess in that relationship. So it's interesting to me because I think children are always trying to sort of seek out who they are by virtue of who their parents are, and in this case, I think he changes. I mean, is that something that you thought about?
Yes, I think he changes. I think to begin with, he doesn't have very much respect for his father because he sees him as a naive innocent who is just sort of impossibly optimistic, impossibly hopeful, and loves his mother unconditionally. And in the end, I think he comes to see that as a real. It's a quality that he respects. As I think later, as we get older, those qualities are ones we come to respect and admire. And when we're young, I think I anyway, sort of dismissed that kind of pure, simple love and devotion.
Well, it's actually more complicated in a funny way. I mean, it seems pure, but it's incredibly complex. I mean, I think one of the things that I love about this book is it's really a book about how men love. And the women love their men, but they're, as you say, they're so much more fiery and more unpredictable and more willful and selfish, I think, in a certain way. But I think what came through to me really passionately was it's sort of a beautiful story about how men love, and it's not something that you see often, I think.
I mean, I don't know that they're typical men. But yeah, so I in the end, I think it is very much about the way that a father and a son love each other as much as it is the way that they love their women. Yeah,
and the women in the book sort of disappear little by little.
Yeah.
Which is also another, I mean, the mother, when she's in prison, she sort of removes herself, and Tess removes herself in a certain way, and Claire has. So it's very powerful in a certain way, because it's not about, the men's love isn't irrational, it's sort of pure, because it's sort of exactly what love is, absent the object. It's still there.
Right.
Right.
I think so.
I don't think I'm asking questions. I'm like, just. Are there any questions from the audience? You guys have any?
Yes.
Yeah. Initially when you started talking, and I thought, well, God, Silver Lake should look up. Again.
Right.
Look, I haven't read it yet. But when you first started talking, I thought, well, of course, any social inequity is going to imply violence. And the people who are going to be most anchored by that inequity are the oppressed within that system as it dissolves. So I watching feminism emerge in this culture finally at this late stage, it's really interesting to study the anger of married women, of the dolls. Suddenly the smartest girls in the class are running the world, and now these poor mute psychotic dolls going through their psychotic mime episodes. It's really stellar to watch that. And so I'm hearing about this violence I'm not quite aware of because I don't know the book.
Right.
I can't wait to dive in. But where does that violence? Is the impulse towards violence, is that towards righting the system? Is it towards creating justice? Or is it what I really think it is? It's just cultural imbalance trying to right itself, trying to re-steady and reposition itself in this kind of chaotic blasting out of trying to get there. And it may not come from the angles or the parties you would anticipate that violence coming from. So I'm sure you've thought about violence quite a lot. And the role
I have.
The role of violence in justice.
Right.
And maybe it's not what we think it is.
Well, if you're asking me sort of where violence comes from, I don't think I'm fully equipped to answer the question. It's certainly...
There's a witness to violence, is what I'm getting at.
Well, I would like to say that that's not true, but I don't know. Maybe it is true. Maybe it is true. I mean, there's a group of women in northern India that have assembled, and they all wear pink saris and they carry bamboo sticks, and they have attacked police officers, and they've attacked men who have perpetrated violence against women and children, and they created this group simply because nobody was doing it for them. Nobody was protecting them. And there's something, in my mind, completely justifiable about that. It's an interesting story. I mean, I'm not advocating that everybody who has a cause gather, and throw on some colorful outfit and start beating people. But there's something very interesting to me about that kind of movement, and I think you see it all over the place.
I think also it's a book is not, a novel is not a piece of advocacy, but
that
these are
just to be clear.
Yeah. but these are characters who are under certain pressures and they react in certain ways. And so I don't know that the book is necessarily saying, yes, people should fight violence with violence, but I think that these particular women, these very specific characters you've written find the violence is a way of dealing with this kind of suppression.
Yeah, and it's a novel about two characters. I mean, I'm not writing a book. It's not a treatise. I'm not making an argument at all. It's really about these two people.
And I guess I really don't have a question. I'm sort of seeing a late stage in capitalism and a late stage in feminism and the unpredictable behaviors. And so sociologically, culturally, to look at those behaviors, which I'm sure you're very studied on. It's just they're coming from places no one can anticipate. And that's why it's sort of interesting to hear novelists speak, because you're talking about that territory that nobody else can get a grasp on.
I don't know. I don't know if that's true. I mean, I think there are plenty of people who could sit up here and be far more articulate about the nature of violence and its origins. And again, I mean, I'm just a novelist. It's certainly something that's interesting to me, and I'm stimulated by the world around me, and I'm angry when I read the newspaper, and the people around me who I respect, they're angry about the world around them, and we have conversations about the world, and it all goes into the writing. But first and foremost, I want to write novels, which is to say, not make arguments.
I just have a question about your process with writing a narrator who is bipolar, gives you the range to sort of write high, write low. Is it like you wake up one morning and say, I want to be the animal version today?
Well, I mean, there's a kind of, I think, writing in and of itself, there's a sort of bipolarity to writing. You're working on a project that takes you 3.5, 4 years sometimes. Some days you feel invincible and brilliant, and some days you feel like you should be doing something else. And in my experience, the only way to write is to write every day. And so there's that aspect of it. And I also found a kind of a love for this character. And this was a much, much longer, messier book when I finished the first draft. And I cycled through, and I have some experience with this myself personally, and it's I know a lot of artists, I know a lot of writers, and most of them are in some way or another unwell. And I think it's a joke, but it's not really a joke. I mean, I know so many people who do some version of this work, and everybody's not even. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. I'm trying to be delicate, but I have myself experienced versions of this. So it didn't feel cultivated. I mean, it felt quite natural to write the character, and I didn't have a sort of Mondays I would be manic, Tuesdays I would be depressive. It just sort of.
So that's sort of my question. Like, did you channel like your own sort of ups?
Sometimes, yes. Yeah. I mean, if I was feeling gloomy, I would exaggerate the gloom. If I was feeling manic, and I definitely, there were days when I could write fast, and you see somebody playing a guitar, or you see somebody playing any kind of musical instrument. It's such a physical thing, and I've always wanted to make writing physical. And you can't do it. You can't really type harder, faster. And I would love to be able to do that. And I've always admired musicians for their ability, or at least from my standpoint, it looks like the art becomes so physical. Even painting, you get to move your arms around. And with writing, you're just stuck there like this. And so I would try to kind of imagine that I was, playing a sport. And I could try to channel that sort of energy and violence and anger, or whatever it was that day, and sort of burn it into the book. Yeah.
So, did you finish where you thought you would finish when you started?
Say that again?
Did the book finish?
Oh, no.
The way that you thought it would finish when you started?
No, not at all. No. No, and it never works out. I don't outline. I don't really plan my books at all. So this book became a love story, a strange love story.
It didn't start that way?
Not really, no. Originally I thought it was going to be about a prison town. And about the sort of, the locals versus the college kids and the prison guards and the prisoners. And I thought it would be a kind of, a story woven of class. And it is that to some degree, but that's sort of not what it became. And I really cannot tell you why it is what it is.
Any other questions?
Any other questions? Comments? Leah?
I was really amazed by this book because in reading the other two books, I felt like both of them dealt with polarity, students and teacher, oppressed and the oppressor. And in this one, it was so ferocious from the very beginning. It was like a storm all the way through. But there was this great tenderness in this book that was also really different, I thought. And I just was curious about it because the three books seem, like a chord. And this, I was just really struck by the beauty of this book in a way. It seemed so deep, and also I thought the murder, I did not have the same view of the murder because I was sort of amazed about the way you described that murder, because it was described both by what the murder was doing and what she did as, it seemed to me, which seemed very intimate and tender, that he was describing them as kind of the same thing, the violence to the kid and the wife felt very balanced. And the whole book to me seemed really balanced, like, that in the other books you were exploring this thing, but for an unbalanced narrator. It had such
It's
a
pretty
sense
balanced.
It had such a sense of balance.
Huh.
That was the kind of beauty of it.
Oh, that's an incredibly nice thing to say. I hope so. I don't know. I hope it's a tender book, and I just with this book I wanted it to be messy. I wanted to write like I sort of described, and I said to a friend of mine, I just wanted to put everything in. I've been so careful in the past. I've been so concerned by beautiful sentences and making everything sort of neat and delicate and
This was a story.
pristine. I wanted it to be wild. I just wanted to take everything that I possibly could and just throw it into the thing and worry about editing later. And I really enjoyed doing it that way. And it's just sort of, not quite stream of conscious, but when I was writing, I just, somebody would die, in the world, and it would go in the book, and I just thought I'd deal with it later, and I wanted that wildness, and the more I read and the more I write, those are the books that I most admire. It's the art that I most admire, that where you have the sense that the creator of that art is a little bit unhinged, that it matters deeply to him or her, that it's something that is urgent and immediate and sort of intimate, but also fearless and wild and sort of burning. And that's why I love those Elena Ferrante. We were just talking about Elena Ferrante, and I could forget the plots of those books, but I cannot forget the tone. There's something sort of on the surface, just burning there, and it's such a hard thing to do. And when I see art like that, I don't, that's all I'm after as an artist and as a reader or as a consumer of art. Yeah. Yeah.
This is a really good was Walla Walla able to support this story, this dialogue in a way that New York City?
I hope so. You mean as a place, or do you mean as an institution? When you say support, what do you mean exactly?
I'm searching for the words, the personal, the themes that your characters embody and carry. Was it easier for you to do that?
I see.
With thinking Walla. Was there a simplicity to it? Was there those wheat fields?
Maybe. Sure, I see what you mean. Yeah, I think. Yeah, I don't think that's a dumb question at all. No, I'm drawn to smaller places. I think perhaps because it feels, the way an island does. You feel like you can contain it, which is absurd, right? Because it doesn't matter how small the place. There's always a lot there. I have no interest at all in writing about New York. And I like places where, honestly, it's a place that I've never read about in fiction, so it seemed like a good place. I'd spent a lot of time there when I was young, and it was a sort of formative world. So for all of those reasons, it felt rich to me. And I know the sort of geography of it. I know the landscape. I know the smells. So yes, I think so. Yeah. All right.
Anything else?
I was curious, you mentioned about the first draft and how messy it was. I was just curious, what is that process of pulling those things together?
Well,
Making it, what was the end product?
with this book, it was a long process because, as I said, I wrote wildly without too much editing as I was going along, and so I had 600 pages probably by the end of the first draft, and it's been through 21 drafts.
The process of trying to impose a structure on it, or what is it that what's sort of the goal?
I'm just trying to get to the end. I don't really know. I truly will start writing. I find a character and a world, and that's and that's it, and I write until I get to the end, and then I go back and I try to sort of shape it into a story. I had an editor that I was working with. I was under contract with this book, and the editor wanted very dramatic changes to the book, and so we parted ways, and I ended up with a different editor, and his advice, his editing to me was invaluable, and without that, but that was 15, 16 drafts in, but he finished the book in a way. He said, this is where I think you should work, and I did that for 6 months towards the end, and I think it was very satisfying.
Does it tend to be an additive process or the process of subtraction?
For me, it's mostly subtraction, but in this case, there was some addition as well. I don't know. I don't have a real logic. I write sort of just. I kind of begin and see if I end up somewhere good.
Was it always written to a you?
Yes, it was written to a you early on, and the you was I had invented this character. It was no good.
No good.
It was a mess, and early readers said, "You got to be fucking kidding me! You have to get rid of that person right away. I hate him."
Okay.
Yeah.
Was the ending always going to be? Did the ending change? I guess.
Yeah.
It did.
The end. Well, without giving away the ending, no, I actually wasn't sure, to be honest.
Okay.
It came towards the end.
I loved it. I just there's so many different ways you could have gone.
Right.
You chose
Right.
A very specific way.
Yeah. I thought this book would be a really happy book. I thought it would be a sort of, it would be my first sort of really look how wonderful the world is book. And I think it is that for those of you on the fence.
Well, you know what it is, and it's a fierce book about love. And it's really powerful, and it defies easy judgments, and it makes you really think about the wages of love, and it's quite beautiful. So on that note, go buy it.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much for coming.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books Author Reading Series. Don't forget that you can listen to this and all of our other great podcasts at skylightbooks.com. Thanks again for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.